So as the slide up above me says, we are doing a panel discussion on ESG. And look, let's be honest, we all know that ESG is very much a sprawling universe, and we couldn't possibly get across every theme, narrative and topic in a 40-minute session. But we will attempt to do something, and that is to focus on one aspect in particular, which is the balancing act that we often find ourselves in. It's meeting ESG obligations between investors and obviously meeting the ESG requirements of those that are in the communities in which our companies are operating. So first of all, it should be, I should introduce myself. My name's Michael Washbourne. I'm the senior journalist with Paydirt Media, and I'm very privileged to be joined by an esteemed panel of people who are particularly good in the ESG field. You may notice to my immediate left, that is not Lindsay Reid, as it says on the screen. We've had a late substitution, and we have Len Kolf from Atlantic Lithium. Len, I don't have a bio from you, but if I remember correctly, you've been with Atlantic and its predecessor Iron Ridge for about 10 years now. And you most recently served as interim chief executive of the company in leading up to its ASX listing. And you're now taking on a more business development and overseeing the geological future of all of Atlantic's properties. So, Len, thanks very much for joining us at very short notice. Sitting next to Len is Mirey Lopez, who we heard from yesterday. Mirey is the General Manager of Sustainability at West African Resources, an environmental and social specialist with more than 15 years' experience working with the extractives industry, regulators and finance institutions. She is currently responsible for WAF's sustainability reporting and managing the company's environmental and social studies. So thanks for joining us, Mirey. One seat over is Mohamed Diarra from Kaizen. Mohamed has led Kaizen since 2021. Kaizen is a consulting group operating in West and Central Africa. Prior to that, he was the country manager for B2 Gold in Mali for 6 years, where he oversaw mine commission and early stage exploitation while dealing with village resettlement issues, CSR issues and government relations. And last but not least, to the very, very far left, well, I won't use one of my editor Dominic Piper's political jokes there, but we have Jason Decarteret, who is the head of Solarcentury Africa. And prior to joining Solarcentury Africa in 2018, Jason worked for a leading emergency power provider for 5 years on major projects in EMEA. He delivered multiple PV and storage projects in challenging regions such as the DRC, Eritrea and Nigeria, and has a strong understanding of both thermal and renewable technologies together with a deep knowledge of the mining industry. So these are our panellists, and I'm going to sit down and join them now and we will get going. Obviously, we have a very small and intimate audience, so please feel free to come further to the front if you would like. And also to those outside, as I said before, please bring your lunch in and contribute to this discussion. So Len, while you are our super sub, I'm still going to throw to you first. And what I wanted to kick off with was the term ESG. When did you first hear of it? And perhaps more importantly, how long have you been doing ESG things?
Just a sec. Okay. Yes, so I guess when I first started, it wasn't ESG. We spoke more about your social license to operate. That was the core focus. And this was, I guess, when I first started so I'm an exploration geologist, Africa focused since I started with Rio Tinto on Simandou back in '96. And certainly it was driven into us, and this is in the Rio days, so this is Rio exploration out of the UK. The importance at a very early stage from an exploration point of view to engage with your community across all aspects of what you were doing there. So communicating what exploration was, what you were trying to achieve, the stage of the project you were at, and being accepted into that community was critical. So we very much focused on the social aspect as that core aspect of what we were doing as an exploration team. And then obviously on the environmental side, it was much more focused on what we were doing in terms of our everyday activities around drilling, etc. But I think that's certainly grown out a lot more now, and with Atlantic Lithium, that initial, I guess, foundation from Rio around the importance of engaging with your community is still strong, but the environmental and the social bit has now grown out significantly more, and how that project can enhance the lives of the communities of where our project is in particular. And it all starts with employing as much as we can within the local community, which we can do in Ghana, obviously. So yeah, I guess in my case, it goes back to the early 90s when I first started in the industry.
And Mirey, if I can ask you, obviously you've been involved in the ESG field for most of your professional career. How have you sort of seen the narrative with regards to ESG change over that time?
Well, I guess backing off on what Len mentioned, initially you would be talking more about the early stages of your permitting, aligning with the Equator Principles, the IFC performance standards, supporting your social license to operate. Whereas now, you're starting to get into the global, the global reporting standards, and that's coming, ESG standards, and that's coming more into the conversation earlier in the planning process of your environmental and social systems that you're putting into place.
Fantastic. And Mohamed, if I can perhaps ask you, as someone who's operated on the ground and generally been at the coalface of a lot of mining operations, how have you seen the ESG narrative play out from a stakeholder and community perspective?
Well, thank you. Just kind of, I think it kind of changed a bit depending on. So ESG is, I think the definition of ESG is very wide, so you don't really, from one standpoint, like let's say, you will look at it in a certain way here in Australia, there's another way in Africa, for example, another way in the US. So I worked for a Canadian company that was working in Mali, so they had a view on ESG, CSR if you want at the time, that was way different than what we had in mind in Mali, for example. So that definition by itself was a problem. So you had to kind of transit that from, let's say, from their point of view to the point of view of the community. I mean, the Malian point of view, if you want, in the case of Mali. So the second point on that, I think it will depend also, depending on where you are in the country. So people will have a different view, whether you're in the north of the country, the south of the country. So as a cultural aspect of what we expect from you. So the expectation is something very important. Now, once you decide if you want to do a program, so the community will come up with like on a want basis versus a need basis. What is needed and what is wanted. And you will have the chief of village coming and tell you, I want a tractor when it doesn't really need it. So you have to kind of decide, is it something that you really need to do, or is it something that he really wants? And sometimes also you don't have basically in the village, for example, you will have the chief of village saying this is what we want, while you have the women and the youth that want something else. So you need to have like an approach where you can have everybody coming and saying, okay, this is exactly what we want, and this is what we need. So I believe that, sometimes you come up with a program, and the last aspect I wanted to point out is that sometimes you also, I will give an example. You give a school to a community. You think you're doing a good job, but at the end of the day, you don't have a teacher. So you're just creating another problem because you have the facilities, but you don't have the program to be run on that. So you need to figure out like, okay, what do I do next? So as a general matter, it's a very complex and simple issue, but it just needs to be, I think, thought of well so it can have an impact in the long term.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, Mohamed, there you sort of summarised that it is a balancing act, as the name of this particular panel discussion is called. Jason, is that something similar you see with those that when you're asked to join into particular projects, you find that it is a bit of a balancing act between the number of stakeholders involved in the project?
Yeah, I would say that, as Mohamed rightly says, ESG is a super wide subject and a lot of different interpretations of how you deliver that, how you actually hit the right goals that are needed, and it is very much a case by case sort of investigation that you have to do. I think for us, we're very lucky because we're on the environmental side, as in we're emission-free power, and that is becoming more and more a need in the mining environment. But then we use quite a lot of land. So because we use a lot of land, we've got to be very careful about how we specify that and how we communicate it. And that can quite often, I think one of the things that we have quite a lot of the time is that when we are generating solar power, there are communities that are very close that don't necessarily benefit from it. So we've been quite proactive on making sure that we do look at healthcare centres and schools that are near or around our areas, and work with, especially with the mines. I think the mines have got a really good attitude, and they've, I think they're the market leaders in really having to engage, but not being forced to engage, but they actually do want to engage and benefit the local communities. And it's just, there are so many different ways that you can do it. How do you choose which one, etc.? So it's a super big conversation to have in every location.
And Len, coming back to you, obviously in your role as one of the senior executives at Atlantic, have you found that it has been a bit of a balancing act to implement sort of, I guess, what some might say are good sustainability practices on the ground, and how they might compare to what Western investors have of the expectations of a company such as Atlantic Lithium?
Yeah, I think... Okay. No, I think balancing act is correct, and the life cycle of the project. So as I said earlier, I've been involved with Atlantic from initial discovery back in 2016-17 through to where we are now in delivery of our DFS and where that project's going to. And in terms of what ESG type projects we implement at those various stages does change significantly through the life cycle of the project and the expectations of investors of what that should look like. Now, at that early stage, from an investment point of view, there isn't really, I don't think, a big understanding about what the impacts at that early stage of exploration and how critical it is to get that right in terms of setting up your relationship with the community where you're a host. You're a host on those grounds and a host with your community. To get that right is so important, so critical for the life of the project going forward, so that once you are at the stage where there is value and that can be seen around the project, that you've got a good foundation to work on within your communities. But now where we are in terms of our project with Atlantic, it's what else can we design in the engineering components or the operational philosophy that ticks those boxes from an ESG point of view, which is really important, and how that benefits the communities throughout the life of the mine and at closure of the mine site. So it's at that point where I guess from investors' point of view, that ESG component is certainly becoming front and center, and it's certainly become a lot more of I use a buzzword, but it is still critically important to get right. But there's a lot more focus on what is ESG and what are you doing to implement that. And in the case of some funds, it's actually a provision of putting capital towards their investment in your company to get that right. So yeah, we're certainly alive to that, and our project does benefit from low water consumption, low energy consumption, proximity to operational infrastructure, that you have a very low carbon footprint and a low water use footprint, and also projects that can be supported by the local communities, because in Ghana, those skills and the training's there. So it's worked very well in terms of our case there.
Thanks, Len. And Mirey, if I can ask you, you gave a fantastic presentation yesterday that showed a lot of the sustainability initiatives that West African Resources are putting in place in Burkina Faso. But I can ask, when did those sorts of discussions and projects start to be implemented? Was it as the mine was being developed, or was it something that you were trying to put in place much earlier in the project life cycle?
How do I answer that question? The planning process definitely started in the early stages, but it's similar to what Len said. It depends on what stage of the life cycle of the project you're in. In exploration, we focused more on understanding our communities, on planning ahead of what capacity we will need, what competencies we will need in the company, and starting to have those discussions early, and beginning to do some of those projects on the ground to support the community. But it wasn't until we went into production when we were starting to generate some capital to then really ramp up our community investments. And that's just the reality of it, right?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps then I can go to Mohamed. A company such as B2 Gold during your time obviously did have some rather strong balance sheets. How much sort of emphasis was going on to some of these ESG practices and working with the communities while you're obviously generating a lot of cash for shareholders?
Well, look, I think it's a matter of like the commitment that you put into the community. So when you go see a minister, for example, and you tell him, okay, I'm going to operate in that part of the country and do such and such program. So they have an expectation. So before you come in already thinking about something, as a mining company, you come in as a TSX listed mining company, and they're expecting a lot from you. So from the get-go, I think it's very important that you can set up some kind of like a limit to that expectation, because you can't do everything. There's a minimum that the state is supposed to do. I mean, having worked in the Ministry of Mines in Mali as well, I know sometimes we push a lot. We know that we're not going to get it, but we're asking a lot. So at the end of the day, is how much can you get from the mining company coming into your country and delivering projects to help you do the basic things that you're supposed to do. So you come, you set up the expectation, you talk to the government, they know what to expect from you. When you go in the community as well, the problem is that you will have a lot of people who think that they will even tell you that the government gave up on them. And then you're the only hope to do something in that community. So, like I said, if you don't come in quickly and set up basically what the expectation is and what are you supposed to do and what can you do, that's like something that you really have to set early on in the project. And once you do it well, the population there in that region will start, like, when you start talk about social license and those type of things, they will start to fight for you, saying, well, we had problems with communities, like, because some people would want to have, the youth would like to drive a truck when they're not trained, for example. But because we did such a good job on other aspects, so some of the members will kind of come up and without us trying to talk about it, they will try to calm things down there. So I think it's very important if you want to have like a year free of incidents and those type of things, when you have people backing you up in what you do to the highest level, to the lowest level in the community. But it has to be done in a way that the expectation, that's the key. I keep saying expectation because this is the key to everything that you do while you're doing it.
Thank you, Mohamed. And Jason, obviously in your line of work as an energy provider, renewables is sort of the new buzzword, a lot of the way that's going on at that. Are you finding that there's a greater correlation now between renewables and ESG than perhaps there was a couple of years ago?
Oh, I mean, for sure, but I think we come in a little bit at the after. When you guys are establishing the mine, I think the ESG is very community local focusing, and then I think there's once that has almost been satisfied and you've got into production. Yeah, normally there's a mad scramble in the first couple of years of production of getting everything, and then I think the focus then goes to, well, how do we make our production costs lower, and how do we become greener, and now that we've actually secured and we've got the enduring sort of ESG set up in the way of the local community is satisfied, then you start looking at, well, where is our product going and what are they demanding? So there's the other side of it that, for example, we've just commissioned Balama graphite mine in Mozambique. And they were, in the first 2 years, they're running 24/7 on diesel because they're off-grid. And that obviously has a large carbon impact. And so we came in and we helped them design a full hybrid of solar battery, a solar PV park, quite a large battery to then give them a renewable energy penetration of 36%, which actually makes them the greenest off-grid mine in Africa. And soon after we made those announcements of this is where we were going, etc., then they actually secured a contract with Tesla for their offtake. So, you know, whether or not our hybrid project had any bearing on that, but I think that there is definitely a focus now from people that are looking for minerals, as in how green are they, and you know, what is the supply chain? Because I think 2030 is not actually that far away, and I think lots of people have made, you know, some really, really good committed decisions on going green, or at least having, you know, trying to lessen their impact and have a better ESG score. But 2030 is going to come around super quick. I mean, I think, you know, when we listened to the opening remarks from Samphire the other day, you know, some fantastic metrics there of 97% local employment rates, but that mine took them 4 years. You know, it's supposed to, you know, I think the hope in the beginning was 18 months, 2 years, and okay, COVID obviously had an impact on that as well, but you know, the years tick by really, really quickly, and I think the sooner people can you know, realize where they're going and where they're getting either their energy from or their supply chains from, you know, it's yeah, I think the you know, time is of the essence. Time is of the essence. But I think it has a long-term value effect on the commodity as well.
Well, perhaps if I can just ask you, Len, just touching on a point that Jason made there about the green commodities. Are you finding that operating in lithium is actually an advantage for meeting some of these ESG outcomes?
Yes, certainly. You know, with lithium being part of the whole EV revolution and a key ingredient to those batteries, there's a green story to tell around that, and that certainly received a lot of focus in the whole ESG sphere. But I think it's still so important at that stage of discovery, project development, mine build. There's a whole ESG component that comes into that, which is just as important. So I know there is a lot of, I guess, excitement around decarbonisation and a critical aspect going forwards. And lithium is considered a key component of that. So we do, I guess, use that as a tool in terms of promoting the company. But you know, still, I believe the social aspect of it is equally important, as is the governance aspect of it, and then the benefits of lithium are another aspect of it. So it's not just that one component. There are multiple components, and getting each of those right through those early stages, through exploration and studies, and then mine development and build to productions is critical.
And Mirey, if I can also come back to something you mentioned about the reporting requirements. Yeah, is there a difficulty in some regards with regards to bridging the gap between, you know, the doing the sustainability practices and then actually sort of quantifying, qualifying them? And I ask that obviously particularly in an African mining context where it might potentially differ, if indeed it does.
It depends on what indicators you're reporting on. Now, for example, right now, obviously climate is the top on the global agenda. But on the ground, if you were to speak to your stakeholders and your communities and find out what are the key risks that they see, that then drive your materiality assessment, then underpins your reporting and your disclosures, then that might not come at the top. That might actually be further down after some of your social elements that would drive your disclosures, or biodiversity. So sometimes you do get into a point where you need to try and find a balance of where you know, you're trying to meet the reporting expectations of the external stakeholders, you know, your investors or your financiers or just the public perception, versus what is important to the people that that are directly within the influence of your project. Yeah.
Jason, if I can ask you, perhaps do you find something similar with obviously the clients that you're regarding, that there are potential targets that they are looking to meet? Obviously, you mentioned sort of the net zero one, for example, but are there other targets and dimensions that clients are looking at you to sort of assist them in terms of their sustainability reporting goals?
So again, I think the numbers of local employment that we actually generate with the solar park, with cleaning, etc., and definitely we have a good range of people that work on our projects, because you can go from a sort of, very similar to the mining, obviously, sort of low skilled, but then with that progressive going up to more and more skilled engineers, etc. And we're looking at running a scholarship project as well, to not only people within that, but to take them internationally around Africa to give them more experience. And I think obviously CO2 is always a target that we always get told, and quite often, especially in sort of more southern Africa, there's a high coal content of the national grid. So, and I think where we have seen a difference is quite often people sort of say, well, running on diesels is really bad, and but as soon as the grid comes, we kind of forget about it. But in actual fact, now we're seeing people saying, well, even though we've got grid, most of that power that's coming from the grid is 80% generated by coal, and we just can't have that, not in the environment that we are. So we are seeing quite a lot of people asking us for now very high energy penetrations. They want to get majority, so over 50%, and some have set targets of 80% or so, which for us to design a hybrid sort of grid, battery, solar, we can get up into the 80% sort of fairly comfortably. As soon as you go over 80%, we have one client in northern Africa that has given sort of like, there is no room to move. It's 100% renewable. But it is unbelievably difficult to actually get that size. And so I think there is a bit of a margin where that renewables can definitely get, unless you're in the fantastic location where you have solar, wind, hydro, tide, whatever you've got to do that, it makes it very, very difficult to get over the 80 or 90%. But we're definitely seeing really strong determinations from people to do really the best they can and push us.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Just out of curiosity, to attain 80%, how many hectares do you need for a solar farm, for a typical mine?
Well, obviously that depends on how big the power draw is. But you can normally we work on around about a hectare of land per megawatt of solar capacity. I think definitely where we've learned from the European projects we do is that there's been a lot of research done on sort of passages for the pass-through of smaller mammals, seeding of local wildflowers, beehives. So there's quite a bit, and in Africa you also can do quite a lot of like dual farming. So sheep can also be do sheep husbandry on the land, etc. So the whole idea of, rather than just blocking it out, because it is emission-free, it is something where there's it's a good, and it's a protected area of land. You have security because you've got to have fence lines, etc. So there's other things that the land can be used for. For sure, we've done a number of projects where we've actually put the solar panels very, very high up, and then we've grown crops underneath, because the solar panels give a sort of a dual sort of shading to the crop, sort of especially for sort of salads and cabbages, and so there is, I think we can be more inventive and we can be more innovative on how we do this, and in most mining operations, the amount of land we use in comparison to tailing dams and everything else is it goes because we're, like I say, the land can still be used, it can still be grown, And the whole idea of trying to make that a more inclusive area is really where we should be going.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Great question there, Mirey. Perhaps if I can just quickly ask, really, to anyone on the panel, we talk about renewables in typically the stock standard reduction of carbon emissions. Is there a role for renewables beyond that, or is that just the niche that we're in at this current particular juncture? Mohamed?
Yeah, I think I have 2 points on that. I think first of all, you can see because of the availability of natural resources in our countries, whether it's Mali or Burkina Faso or Guinea, with solar and water and all that, it doesn't make any sense to still be heavily, have the resources based on fossil fuel and generators and those type of things. So it doesn't even make any sense that we're not fully integrated, like have a hybrid production today. I mean, it's another the capex. There's so many excuses not to do it, but this is the future. We have to do it. And the second point that I can add to that is when we saw what happened with COVID and all the coups happening in our countries today, once you have the land, the borders locked and everything else, and you're on site, you can't have access to fuel, you cannot have access to diesel because you have a coup. So you basically dependent on importing diesel, importing all kind of fuel, and for your production inside, in country, and you cannot, in a landlocked country when you can have access to none of these. So as an independence point of view, it makes a lot of sense, and we've seen that so many times. We've been even in the problem with Russia, we felt it all over the region there because of the inflation, the price of the things went up. So I'm just saying, on those 2 points, really, renewable energy makes a lot of sense, and we really need to get on that.
Well, we definitely still have a bit of time left to throw some questions out to the floor. I do have a list of further questions that we can continue on with, but if we could get a mic just over here, Kim, we've got a question. So, just over here, Kim.
Thank you. My question starts with Mohamed. You had described ESG as a white definition, a white view. And I've shared that with a few people via my phone and they've gone, absolutely. But I noticed that that's been pretty silent on the panel. And so I am curious whether you've put that out there and it's going nowhere because it's a white audience or predominantly a white thinking audience. And what might a not white view, a not white definition of ESG look like? And if you're running that company that's doing that not white ESG, what does it look like?
Yeah, Mohamed?
I'm scared to answer that now because you put the white and the black situation here. I'm trying to be politically correct, but all right, okay. No, but listen, sometimes, I mean, through my experience, not as a private sector, public sector, as an African Malian, sometimes you will have people telling you, and you will have, again, if you see lately what happened in Mali, for example, and the Malian people are a little bit upset with the French community. It's not because we have a problem with the French per se, but sometimes we have these things coming down to us. This is how you guys think. This is how you guys should do this and should do that. So you have this view on ESG that, I'll give you an example. One time we had someone that I was consulting for somebody, and he said, well, I'm doing all these great things in Africa, and I gave these villages like a great library. And the next day he said, but I had a problem. I said, what was your problem? He said, well, the next day I saw those villagers, these idiots, coming and taking all these, tearing out the books and putting food in the book, in the pages to eat. Those are expensive books. And I said, well, did you ask them if they can read? No, I didn't ask them. Well, they can't read. To them, the utility of the book is, because in Africa we get like all the foods and stuff in pages. So they said the utility is the leaf to put the food inside, you know. So you're giving something to somebody who doesn't need it and doesn't know how to use it. So you're forcing something on someone who doesn't have the same definition of what you want him to achieve. And a lot of times the problem is that arrogance, and some people come and decide for you what do you need instead of asking exactly what do you need, not what you want, but what you need and what's impactful for you. And I think the problem, it's getting better. The problem resides really there, you know, on what is expected, and I'll talk about expectation. I don't know if it makes any sense here. Okay.
Did anyone want to add anything further to that? Any other panelists? Yes, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a classic example, and very well put in a way. Communication is really the most important, and I think what's important in one area is very different to the next. So, it is always the first thing that we do is how do we communicate with the local community, and what would they like to see? What are their pain points right now that we can try and help with? Because sometimes, I often find that, although money is more than likely always something that's going to help and give choices, sometimes it's not actually really what they're really after. They're after opportunities. They're after something that's more relevant to them there and now. And I would say that communication is definitely the key to unlocking that.
Great question. Do we have any others in the audience? Don't be shy. Here we are. Mike will just come around to you now.
Yeah, thank you. Very insightful and thought-provoking discussions. But my first comment will be on the issue that's just been discussed. I think it's very easy to just say communication and it's left at that. Who are you going to be communicating to? I think that's the key issue. It's also easy to tick the box, which is what a lot of corporates do when they go to Africa, just tick a few boxes and say ESG complete. But it's going right deep, like, talking to finding the avenues to be able to talk to the chiefs, to talk to the local people. That way you'd have engaged completely, and you're sure it will benefit the people. And going back to a few discussions earlier, you want to make the people happy, and when you've made the people happy, you can see. And then coming to renewables, I just want to understand how the penetration levels have been in African projects. Is it essential as part of getting business in there? What are the penetration levels?
Okay. Do we want to? It sounded like there were two questions there as well. Perhaps Len or Mirey, did you want to comment on the first point there, with regards to it's sort of the what, not necessarily a ticking a box sort of exercise?
Yes. Just to say, not all corporations go and tick boxes. If you have a look at a sustainability report, I think they'll give you a bit of an idea of what we do. And I think the industry as a whole has actually moved beyond just ticking boxes. You can see that from in terms of expectations, you can see that going now, for example, my career is not as long as some of the other panelists on here, 15 years versus 25. But even in my career, I've noticed a difference when I used to go and do consultations in communities or doing socioeconomic surveys, what the expectations were and what the conversations were with those communities versus now. Now they want you to state what your commitment is specifically. It's not just, we're going to, you do A, B, and C at some point in the future. It's no, come back and report to us in a month, in 2 months, tell us exactly what you're doing. And I think through even the audit systems now in place, you can't just go and tick boxes. You need to be able to go back that up. And we actually have one of our environmental audit people here. We're going through an ITE process right now to finance the Kiaka construction. And they went to site. They went and spoke with their communities to understand, are they actually doing what they're saying? So I think things have progressed on both sides, on the mining as well as the communities together, past the ticking box point. You might still see very flashy reports, but if you drill down to the data, there is substance there to back that up. I think that was the main point.
Fantastic.
Yeah, just potentially to add to that as well, in the case of Atlantic Lithium, we've established a community development fund as one of our commitments. So this is above and beyond royalties to government. And this is actually a community development fund which we manage by a committee that's made up of members from the community, as well as government and the operating mine. And we've gone through and done a census amongst all the impacted communities around the project to identify the 5 key pillars that concern the communities. So in our case, it's education, hygiene, as an example, microfinance for micro business. So whatever that fund puts, or whatever that community development fund supports, has to meet one of those pillars. So this is something that's done beyond box ticking and has certainly moved further from that. So as just an example.
Sorry, could I just make another comment? Something else that, in terms of understanding expectations, you also have to give yourself, as an entity, as a corporation, as a company on the ground, it's really important to make sure that you work into your environmental and social programs, your checks. Every year, every couple of years, do a review, do another survey, understand how the social fabric has changed in your communities. There may be an incident, a political incident, a security incident somewhere, and all of a sudden you have an influx of people from the other side of the country. That's going to change your demographic. That's going to change pressure in your natural resources. And there, once again, expectations now change of what the community needs, of what their expectation of you will be, to manage that, to manage now more pressure on job availabilities, natural resource availability, all of that, even housing of those people, even if it's family members that are moving down from a different part of the country. Where are they going to go? Are they going to compete for those jobs now?
Thank you, Mirey. We have actually run out of time, but perhaps, Jason, if I can just get you to quickly address the last point about penetration of renewables.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it really depends if you're looking at it in the mining sector, as in this is ADU, but Africa as a continent is unbelievably blessed with renewable energy resources. So there's lots of hydro, there's an amazing amount of solar and wind. So whatever the sort of the renewable energy penetration of Africa as a whole can be a hell of a lot higher than it is today. And I think there are very strong movements by governments, by individuals, to get that. At the moment, the same old sort of story is sold time and time again, is there's 600 million people in Africa who do not have access to energy. And no matter which way that energy comes to them, and it does change. I mean, obviously Africa is so enormous as a continent. There's some national grids are very coal intensive, others are very hydro intensive. It really does make up quite a complicated patchwork. But what I would say is that the opportunity Africa as a whole has to get its renewable energy penetration much higher with more wind, more solar, and integrating the big hydros to try and stop their production of power during the day when solar can do a lot of the heavy lifting, and then use them as sort of super big batteries for evenings. I think we're in its real infancy of that sort of thought process and planning, and I think that's a huge opportunity that Africa can do really well with.
All right, thank you, Jason. Look, I think I'm sure you can all agree that our panellists are very passionate and provide some very insight into ESG across a very broad spectrum, as we said at the top of the mark. So, if I could please get you give us a hand for Len, Mirey, Mohamed, and Jason.